Changing a country isn't easy, but change is inevitable. And the choices we make today will shape our country for generations to come. That's why we've published our first book from Australia Institute Press. What's the Big Idea offers 32 ideas for a better Australia, from leading thinkers such as Bob Brown, Sally McManus, Dr. Emma Shortis, and Professor Brian Schmidt. The essays are a roadmap and a reminder that the solutions exist. Australia just needs the courage to implement them. Visit australiainstitute.org.au or follow the link in the show notes to order your copy of What's the Big Idea today.
Hello and welcome to Dollars and Cents, the Australia Institute podcast, where we're talking about just what the hell is going on in the economy. I'm Elinor Johnston-Leake, the senior content producer here at the Australia Institute, and as always, I'm talking to our chief economist, Greg Jericho. Hello, Greg.
Hi, Elinor. Well, not as always. I wasn't here last week.
Welcome back.
Welcome back. I'm all in one piece.
Very good.
Amazingly.
Yeah.
Wear a helmet, everybody. They save your life. They saved my life.
Yep.
And watch out for 10-year-old kids come around corners on bikes because
they'll get you.
They'll get you every time, I tell you.
Well, good to have you back, Greg. So, Greg, we've talked about tariffs a bit before on the pod, but they're a lot more in the news than they have been in more of a concrete sense than we've been talking about them in the past. There's been a lot of noise coming from the US about aluminium tariffs and Australia apparently flooding the market. What's the go there?
Yeah, I mean, as all our listeners know, and especially if you've listened to the Follow the Money podcast with the glorious title of Stop the Steal, well done to our producer Agus for coming up with that. Trump is basically putting a 25% tariff on steel and aluminium imports into the US.
It's 25% without exceptions or exemptions, and that's all countries, no matter where it comes from, all countries. If made in the United States, however, United States of America, there is no tariff, it's zero. This is the beginning of making America rich again.
And we're, of course, trying to get an exemption because that's what happened last time. Trump was in power. He did the same thing. Australia went in, got an exemption, said, what the hell are you doing? We're your ally, you idiot.
Yep.
And also, you have a trade surplus with us, so why are you trying to hurt us? But what's happened this week, not only has Trump first sort of said, oh, yeah, we'll do something, but again, that's Trump, who the hell knows. But one of his advisors has come out and started saying that, oh, no, Australia has been flooding the US market with aluminium and broken promises that were made. And it's all a bit weird.
Yeah. You know? What does being an ally mean anything anymore to the US?
Yeah. And also we're not flooding the market. Well, you know, what this is all about is apparently when Trump did the deal with Turnbull back in 2018. So we're talking, you know, we're starting to get back in history here. Apparently a verbal agreement was done, which, okay, there's no record of this verbal agreement. No one's made a note of, I had a chat with Trump and he said this and I said, yep, cool bananas. But apparently there was a verbal agreement that, okay, we won't put the 25% tariff on your aluminium imports, but please don't increase the amount of imports you're doing. And apparently after Trump lost his election under Biden, apparently there's some suggestions that maybe our aluminium imports have increased or something. But I think we need to sort of step back here and talk about what exactly is the scope of this. And of all imports of aluminium products into the US, Australia accounts for a little bit over 1%.
Yeah, not exactly flooding the market.
No, it depends on the year, but we're kind of not even like in the top 10. Like we bring in 1%. Canada brings in 35%. China, 12%. The UAE, 5%. Mexico, 6%, and there's a whole lot of other countries like Bahrain, India, South Korea, Germany, Russia even, and then you get down to Australia. And it's a case of, hang on, we're flooding the market with our 1%.
Did he say that any of these other countries were flooding the market?
No, for some reason, I think the only reason this advisor mentioned Australia is because Trump mentioned that, I might give an exemption to Australia, and I guess this guy, for some reason, doesn't want that, and perhaps doesn't understand that the whole reason Trump says he wants these tariffs on everybody is so that everyone will come and bend the knee to him and he can grant exemptions like a monarch. But it seems all very bizarre to be suggesting that we're flooding the market.
But Greg, aren't these like private companies in Australia exporting to the US? How did the Australian government even really stop them from, supposedly flooding the zone?
Yeah, you can't. I mean, it's a private market. American manufacturers can buy from whoever they want. And the line about, we don't want you to export more was purely because, if we give you an exemption so you don't have the tariff, then actually your aluminium is going to be cheaper. And it's like, well, of course US manufacturers are going to take advantage of that. I mean, and it all goes back to the whole thing about these tariffs and everyone sort of freaking out and suggesting, this is a test of Albanese.
We got a carve out in 2018 and it's now a test of the relationship and his ability to deal with President Trump. But this is a test. This is a test to see whether Anthony Albanese's previous remarks and Kevin Rudd's previous remarks about President Trump has done this nation harm.
I mean, steel and aluminium exports in total account for a bit over 1% of all Australia's exports. And of the sort of aluminium and steel exports to America account for about 13 to 15% of that.
So is this not really a big deal?
Well, I mean, it's a big deal if you're an aluminium company who's got an export contract to America, I guess, but it's not going to hurt Australia's economy. I'm hearing sort of claims of, this will be a job killer. It's not going to be a job killer. One, because if you're a US importer of stuff, okay, the price of importing aluminium or steel from Australia has gone up. But what are you going to do? You can't go, I'll get it from Canada because they've got the tariff. I'll get it from China. Oh, no, they've got the tariff. Everyone's got the tariff.
Does the US have much of a domestic manufacturer?
They do, but there's a reason why they import a hell of a lot of steel and aluminium, and that's because they don't make enough. They don't have the capacity to match the demand, and that's the whole point. And if let's say you're Blue Scope Steel or something, which actually does have operations in America, but let's say you are an Australian steel manufacturer or aluminium producer, are you going to really up sticks and move to America to avoid a tariff for accessing a market that probably makes up about 15% of your total business? And also, that if you go there, and then you go, no, we'll just keep exporting to China or Europe or something and from America. But China and Europe might go, no, we're going to put a 25% tariff on steel and aluminium exports from America because, this is what happens with tariffs. Europe are not going to sit back and go, oh, yes, please just slap us around. Same with China. They're going to retaliate and they can put on tariffs as well. And so in that instance, it's much better for a firm to go, well, I'm going to stay here in Australia. Yeah, America are going to have to pay more for my aluminium or steel, but I can at least export to China and Germany and UK or wherever and not get hurt, So it's a really weird issue. It's a really weird debate and how it's been framed that we saw this week. The opposition was all geared up to get into Albanese because Kevin Rudd had said things about Trump and everything like that, and it's going to be a failure of leadership. It's like, come on, guys, America is not the be-all and end-all of Australia's economy. It's not our most important trading partner by far, and certainly even with steel and aluminium, it's not even. So it's like, let's all just calm down.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure this won't be the end of our discussion of tariffs. I'm sure there will be more to talk about in the future. All right. Well, also in the news, Greg, new data has come out to do with housing. Is this finally it, Greg? Am I finally going to be able to afford a house?
No.
Oh. Oh.
Unless you bought it a few years ago.
No.
No. What
Maybe next time.
What we've just got this week was the most recent lending data, which gives us the size of the average home loan.
Mm.
And in the last 3 months of last year, so the December quarter, a record high average home loan was set in every state except for Victoria, and Victoria only just missed out on setting the record. The average across Australia now for a home loan is $666,000. That's just for the home loan. Now, remember, you're supposed to maybe borrow 80% worth, so kind of, but that's across all of Australia. If we go to New South Wales, so we're really talking Sydney here, the average broke the previous record of 780,000, which was set in the September quarter last year, and went up to a $811,000 average mortgage. That's
in what,
the average.
Like 5 months? But it's in September, you said?
Yeah. So in September,
it's gone up by Jesus Christ.
It went up by $30,000. Here's the other sort of thing to sort of think about. In the past 5 years, the average home loan in New South Wales, in Queensland, South Australia, and Western Australia have all gone up by at least $200,000.
Yeah.
In South Australia, which you think, I'm in Adelaide, that's a nice and cheap place.
Mm.
The average home loan has gone from $372,000 to $580,000. That is a 56% increase in 5 years. And if you're thinking wages have gone up by that amount, I'm sorry, wages have probably gone up about 21% in that time. So it really is a staggering increase over time. And unfortunately, our colleague David Richardson did some sort of playing around with the numbers, and what he thought was an interesting way to look at housing affordability was just basically look at how many years worth of average earnings is the average dwelling price. So, basically if the average earnings is 50,000 and the average price is 500,000 for a home, well, that's 10 years worth of thing. And what he has found is that there has, over the past 20 years, there's been a huge increase in the cost of a house in terms of how many years it's going to, it's worth. And he thought, well, okay, the last 20 years, that's a pretty good period that we can sort of say that there's been bumps and rises, and there's, there was a GFC, there was a mining boom, there was a pandemic, we had that period of after the GFC where things weren't great. So let's just pretend that we have another 20 years like that where we're going to be.
Yeah.
And he's projecting if it keeps going like it is in Sydney, the average dwelling price in Sydney in 2044 will be equivalent to nearly 27 years worth of someone's average earnings.
Yeah.
Or to put it in real terms, at the moment, the average dwelling house in Sydney, or in the middle of last year, was about 1.4 million. If it was 26 times the current earnings, it would actually be 2.4 million.
Yeah.
So in effect, we're looking at a $1 million increase in real terms of the average house. Look, this is
I'm
all
just having flashbacks
here.
to, was it recently Peter Dutton said, like, I bought my first house at 19. Everyone just needs to, save up like I did.
Yeah, at 19.
Yeah, it'll take me more than 19 years to save up to buy a house, assuming I don't have any other expenses.
Yeah. And
great.
And even one of the other things that Dave's figures found is that Hobart, for example, has become extremely unaffordable because the average earnings in Tasmania is generally lower than in other states because, a lot lower paying jobs, basically, all the high paying, a lot of the high-paying jobs are, there's not a lot of mining there. There's not a lot of high finance and, high-paying jobs. So average is low, but there's been a really strong increase in house prices in Hobart. They're still cheaper than most other capital cities, but relative to the average earnings, they have exploded to the point where if they keep going at this pace, Hobart will be the second hardest place to live and buy a home in 20 years' time, because what we've seen is not so much a lot of people in Hobart buying houses, a lot of people from the mainland going, geez, I can't afford a house in Sydney. Oh, Hobart's pretty cheap. I'll buy an investment property down there.
Yeah.
And that has caused Hobart house prices to explode over the past 7-8 years, which has made it kind of unaffordable for people living in Hobart to actually be able to buy a home in Hobart. It is just a horror show all round. So, yeah, good news. Hope everyone's happy with that.
Yeah.
Basically, I'll just run through a few things. So 811,000 is the average for New South Wales. The next highest, where do you reckon the next highest is?
Probably Melbourne.
Nope.
No? Canberra?
Right here in River City, Canberra, 650,000, followed by Queensland with 635, and then Melbourne or Victoria with 632,000.
Gosh.
So it's that's still,
So
we're talking massive amounts of money.
Should we move the office somewhere else maybe? On a related note, the ABS has also put out some data this week that talks about where the most advantaged and disadvantaged places in Australia are to live. So first off, how do they go about doing this?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. They only do it about every 5 years, and they make use of the census data for this. And now, normally we'd sort of just look at, okay, what's average earnings, where it's the highest, average earning places, or you could look at, say, unemployment rates like postcode and things like that. But what they have tried to do is look at not just income, but other factors that are sort of indicators of perhaps wealth as well as income and just sort of advantage. Now, they've been doing this for a while, and a few things have dropped out. Like about 10, 15 years ago when they were doing, one of the indicators of advantage was if you had access to the internet in your home. Now, of course, that's kind of pointless.
Yeah.
Everyone's got it. It doesn't really indicate whether you've got advantage or disadvantage because everyone's got it. Whereas back in 2010 or whatever, that was a bit of an indicator. Have you got high-speed broadband as opposed to dial-up or something like that? So these things have changed. So what they do is they categorize, they come up with a whole raft of different categories that are present in the census data, and they weight them. They have some formula. Like, so for example, things that indicate you are in a household of advantage. Does your household have 3 or more cars?
3 or more?
3 or more.
Gosh, that is advantaged.
Do you have 4 or more bedrooms? Is the annual equivalized income of that household more than $100,000? Does the home have a mortgage as opposed to being a renter?
Yep. Yeah, I was going to say before that, a bunch of these could just be most share houses.
Yeah. Is the highest educational attainment of someone in the household a bachelor or more? And again, also skill level if you're in the highest skill level. And also, what is the size of your mortgage repayments? If your mortgage repayments are more than $2,900 a month, that's also a sign you're in a place of advantage. Now, on the other end, disadvantage. Is the household being rented from state, territory housing authority or a co-op or something like that? Are the rent payments less than $250 a week? Is the household income less than $26,000? Is the highest educational attainment year 10 or less? Don't have a car? You're a person aged 65 years or over and you don't own your home, where more than half of the people need assistance. So we're talking mostly disability. So again, it's not a case of the particularly poor. It's just the probably less advantaged because they're disabled. Households where all people aged 15 years and over are unemployed, or households with a child under 15 and the parent or parents are unemployed. So they basically put all those together and calculate and come up with not so much a number, but they're able to determine, okay, we'll split these into what we call quartiles, so basically lots of 25%, and we work out what percentage of each geographical area, basically suburb, are in the top 25, second top 25, second lowest 25, and bottom 25. And from that, then we can sort of look at where are the most advantaged places to live, where are the least advantaged places.
So where are the least advantaged places in Australia?
Yeah, now this is not going to be a shock to probably anybody. The least advantaged places are those places certainly in rural outback areas and very much with high levels of Indigenous people. And number one is Aurukun in Queensland. And number two, also in Queensland, Palm Island.
Oh, yeah.
Number three, Torres Strait Islands in Queensland. Number four, Yarrabah, also in Queensland. Now, to give you some context, Aurukun, 93% of households were in the most disadvantaged group.
Wow.
93%. Palm Island was 91%. Others, Tiwi Islands, West Arnhem, East Arnhem Land in Northern Territory. So very highly correlated to Indigenous populations, which was kind of pretty damning given that these figures came out on the same day that Parliament was talking about the Closing the Gap anniversary.
No nation's story is simple, least of all Australia's. It is a rich, proud and deeply remarkable story, a story of hope, achievement and survival against the odds. Our stories are intertwined, but as the Closing the Gap report routinely lays bare, there are still too many areas in which we are not together. The latest,
and again, yes, it's very much correlated to income, but it's also just even places with low income that are in the city are more likely to have 3 cars or more likely to have bigger houses or various things like this that actually, or better education, didn't drop out in year 10 because the education and school system in the cities is better than in those, very remote areas. If you look at across the states, the state with the highest amount in the bottom group, of course, is Northern Territory, 30% of people. By contrast, ACT only had 9.8% in that bottom segment. We have here in the ACT 48%, so nearly half are in the top group.
Yeah.
Because you think about the ACT, education, house size, income, cars probably as well. I mean, because the public transport is shit.
Yeah.
All these type of things.
Also not very remote
and
in
not
any way.
remote at all.
No.
So, and so the ACT has a lot of advantage. New South Wales, 35.3, Victoria 35.8, Queensland 30.4 because of, the high levels of remoteness. South Australia as well, really low, only 28.4. And one of the reasons why South Australia does have a really low level advantage is because South Australia is very rural.
Yeah.
It has Adelaide, but once you get out into the rural areas, and I sort of checked where my old, where I grew up, and it is in sort of the bottom 5% of all the many suburbs and towns in Australia, because there's a lot of rural areas, high levels of, especially South Australia, high levels of government renting and housing. And one of the things that I've found interesting about this, one, it's helpful to just highlight the fact that there is a great city-rural divide in Australia, but also the fact that it's kind of bad that being a renter or being in government housing is viewed as being a indicator of disadvantage.
Yeah.
And so it should be, what governments and policymakers should be looking at these things and not going, okay, how can we get more people to have a 4-bedroom house? But, okay, why is this an indicator of disadvantage? Surely the fact that they live in government housing actually should be a bit more common and actually should be something that doesn't indicate disadvantage. It just indicates you're living in a house that's, public housing. Now, obviously, you can't sort of say, let's try and make things better for people who left school at year 10. No, you want to get more people finishing high school because we just know education is a good indicator of future success, and it's just better for everyone, really. But there are those other things that you can go, well, okay, if you're a retiree and you don't have your own home, that's an indicator of disadvantage. Okay, let's do something about that. Let's not make that an indicator of disadvantage. Let's actually assist these people so that actually they don't feel it's not something that people were suggesting, oh, God, if you retire and you don't own your home, you're stuffed. Because going back to our first part, there's going to be a hell of a lot of people of a certain age who are going to be retiring and don't own their home outright. So we better start thinking about, okay, if that is currently an indicator of disadvantage, what can we do to make sure it's no longer one?
Yeah, it's great that these sets of figures have come out in the same week. We can compare them in the same episode.
I mean, and as I say, if we go back 15 years, internet access was an indicator of advantage and disadvantage. Now it's not, because we've all got it. So if, it's a case of let's look at these things that are indicators of disadvantage and either do something about it. So one, you don't have people leaving school before year 10 or at year 10, or let's go, okay, why is that thing a disadvantage? Oh, probably because our policies are all geared to you owning your home. And if you don't own your home in your retirement, oh, whoops, we didn't expect that.
Yeah.
Maybe let's fix that. So I think they're really interesting on a number of indicators. We previously last year, our colleague Matt Grudenoff compared the previous measure from 2016 of advantage and disadvantage with life expectancy and found a really strong correlation, and also found a really strong correlation again with rural and remote compared to urban. So they're very useful, really good for policymakers. But if we just sort of keep doing the same thing, and nothing much is going to change. Instead, you got to look at these and think, okay, how can we make this change?
We've still got some time in this sitting period of Parliament. Maybe we'll get some pleasant surprises come through. Who knows? Unlikely. Anyway.
No, that's not going to happen. Who is this person I'm talking to, Elinor?
What?
Let's not go into fantasy levels.
All right, I'm sorry.
Debate here.
All right, well, that's probably all we've got time for today, Greg. Thank you so much for coming back and, returning to the pod all in one piece.
Returning all in one piece. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Elinor. Make sure to tune in next week. It will be, I'm sorry to say, interest rates. Next week is interest rate week. Currently around 90 to 95% of the betting, and that's basically what it is on the market, are saying there will be a cut. So if there's
Have you
not
got
a
in
cut,
on that, Greg?
Hey?
Have you placed a bet on that? No,
I
not a betting man.
Don't do
No.
Financial trading, unfortunately, because I'm pretty useless at actual finance. I'm good at telling them what they should do, but I'm not good at actually predicting what will happen. But it does seem likely there's going to be interest rate cuts, so we'll talk all about that and everything else economic. Also next week, weirdly, after the Reserve Bank makes the decision on interest rates, the latest wage figures will be out. So we'll be able to know, are wages actually going up or not? And that will be worth tuning in for. So can't wait to be back next week. Thank you all for listening. This episode of Dollars and Cents was recorded on February the 13th, and some things may have changed. My column, which looked at the impact of tariffs, is in the Guardian Australia site, so you can go there and find all the graphs. And you can find all other wealth of information, including our new live blog on the Australia Institute site at australiainstitute.org.au. My social media handle on Blue Sky and the other social media apps that I occasionally use is @GrogScammit, and Elinor is @Elinor Johnston Leak.
Correct.
Our music, as always, is by Blue Dot Sessions. Have a great week. See you all then.
See ya.